Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today, no matter what it is you're doing. For the free wire tutorial today, I'd like to share my triple drop earrings. Now, can you have too many earrings in your life? No, especially when you can make them yourself for a fraction of the cost of what you can find in the stores and really quite easily. Let's head down to the board and take a look at today's project. So here's an example pair of today's earring project, just a little triple drop design. The only real thing that limits what beads you can use is the drill aperture. Because we're working on curved wire, we do need a reasonable size through that centre. So I found some reasonably small beads in my lovely colourful bead stash, and they work really well on that curved wire. So let's just pop this up in the corner and have a quick talk about the materials we're going to use. So I have some short offcuts of wire. These are all in 1mm or 18 gauge, and some of them are really quite teeny. This is only about 1.75 inches, just shy of 2 inches on the shortest one. I'm also going to be using some very large, these are 9mm inner diameter jump rings, and they've been made in quite a heavy wire. It's 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire to make those jump rings. And they have an assortment of beads to work with. So let's just tip those out and see if they go kerflewing off the table like they normally do. There's a couple of tools that I like to use for this project. I've got my six-step bail making pliers. If you don't have those, you can employ any round form that you have in the house. I've also got my trusty ring mandrel. And I'll also show you how you can use these memory wire pliers to help you with the teeny tiny rings that you need to make just as part of this design. I've got a second set of chain nose pliers. You don't have to have bent chain nose pliers if you don't wish to. So let's start with the largest of those drop sections. I'm going to repeat my design with these lovely blue clay beads. Blue clay beads with lovely pretty little flowers on, very cute, from a bead blend. So if I just pop those inside those jump rings for now, they can sit there until we're ready to use them. Clay is a great bead to use for a design like this because it's not as fragile as glass or crystal might be. So for the largest drop, I've cut 2 lengths of that 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and this is around about 4 to 4.5 inches in length. So if I grab a hold of the end of those wires and just smooth them through, so especially that centerpiece is nice and warm, it only takes 2 or 3 passes of the thumb and forefinger to get that lovely and fluid and ready to go. Now when I'm making earrings, I do like to make the 2 pieces side by side so I can ensure that I get a really quite symmetrical pair of earrings. I'm going to start off by creating a U shape in that wire and just crossing those 2 end sections over. Now if I just show you, one side is slightly higher than the other. There are 2 ways that you can remedy this. We've got more wire than we need, so the quickest way is to put that back onto your round form and ensure that both of those are sitting smoothly side by side, so you are actually getting the same size. And what we could do is just trim both of those ends away to ensure that they are equal. If you are working with slightly shorter lengths of wire, for instance scrap wire, what you can do is take the edge that's longer and just push that over the centre, and the shorter one just open up slightly, and in that way you centralise your U shape in your usable wire. So what we're going to do now is we've set that size. If you wanted to, you could very gently hammer that. One of the options that I prefer to use is just very gently just opening and closing any flat pliers over the very lowest part of that section of wire. Once we've done that, we're going to apply the beads. Now I'm going to make both pairs at both sides of the pair at the same time. What you might find is that the hole in your bead is not quite large enough to move freely around the wire that you've created. Now there's 2 ways that you can fix this. You can pick another pair of beads with a larger hole in them, or because I'm working with clay, I'm just going to draw that around carefully. Clay is one of the few materials that I will actually do that with. You do, as I say. So after a mildly inconvenient little power cut there that caused a few dramas, what I was going to say is that if you struggle to get the bead onto the curved form of wire that you've created, you have a couple of options. You can either open the form out and try to get that to come back to the exact shape you created, or you can simply change up your bead for one with a much larger drill hole. So metallic beads are really cool because they tend to have not just a larger drill aperture, but they're also really proofed against getting damaged by moving around that carved wire. So clay and the metallics, really good ideas to use in a project like this, whereas the crystals are a little bit more prone to being damaged by making that happen. So let's just pop that second clay bead on, and before you put the little curly bits over the end, you do need your bead to be sat in the centre of that little U form. So just checking that these are both still the same dimension. We haven't changed it too much. I would probably make these just a little bit shorter than they are, because that's quite a long drop. I do like long earrings, as you probably know already. So what I'm going to do is just trim these down a little bit. I'm going to grab my flush cutters, make sure that I get the same size on both sides. And there we go. So we've got a little diminishment on the drop length there, and a few bits of wire all over the shop. So when you're ready to make this into the next part of the tutorial, I'm just going to re-centralize that. What I'm going to show you how to use is this pair of memory wire pliers. Now they're like having a 2 different sized pin bail maker, but they're really handy for things like this because you can make repeatable loops on the end of the wire. Just grip that end and twist that over the top like so. Move that around until the cut end of the wire touches the long section of wire that it's come from. When you're making that second loop, make sure that it's moving in the same direction. It's really easy if you move one towards you to move the second one towards you after you flipped it over. If you do that, you'll have one loop going that way, but the other loop going this way, and that's definitely not what we want. So let's repeat that again on the second earring drop side. Just rotate that around until you get the loop turning over and the cut end of the wire just touching the wire that precedes it. So again, I could go on automatic and bring the wire towards me. I just need to take a look and make sure that it's moving in the same direction. Now if for any reason this comes slightly out to one side, we're just going to straighten that up and give them a tiny squish to make them nice and strong. We'll be able to mess around with the exact orientation of those loops in just a little while. Let's just pop them up there so that they're ready to create those earrings at the end of the tutorial. Got to love technology, am I right? Absolutely. As long as you've got pairs of beads with large enough drill holes or apertures through the centre to go on curved wire, you are good to go. You can just use up odds and ends from your stash to make really quite glamorous earrings. They can be all quite close together if you use smaller sized beads with large drill holes so that they sit on the central U form on the wire. You can make them quite long, or you can even make them quite digi. You can add multiple beads onto each strand of wire if you have enough of them to make up pairs of earrings. The world is your oyster. It's a lovely design to use and endlessly customizable. For the next section of the earrings, I'm going to use lengths of wire again, cut from a 1mm or 18 gauge reel, and these are around about 3 to 3.5 inches in length. So we'll give those a quick warm through, especially through that central section, and we'll take them a little bit further down the ring stick, or the mandrel if you prefer, to get a slightly narrower U shape. And again, you can mess with that until those two ends sit neatly equal and opposite each other. Now you may again just want to grab the first section and make sure that the next one will nest inside. So I think that actually looks quite nice, but you have the opportunity to, if that's a little bit too broad for you, you want it to be slightly smaller inside, we can pop that back onto the mandrel. Let's just grab that mandrel back in and just pop a little bit of heat and warmth through it and move it further down. Bring those tails just slightly splayed apart before you move that down, and then you've got a slightly narrower gauge U shape to fit in the centre. So I quite like how that looks. You can also take an estimation as to, we have slightly too much wire at the end there, but before we do anything else we need to add those next beads in. So I'm going to try with these faceted rondelles. They look like they'll work. They do indeed. if you make a very, very narrow shape, a very narrow U shape in the wire, it will affect the size of bead hole that will actually work. So I'm just going to hold these over the top of one of the first segments and estimate how much I want to cut away. So I would say we need to cut just a little bit off the top there. So I'm going to line that up over my hand just to make sure that they're sitting at the same space. You can even turn them sideways if it's easier for you to see. And we're just going to trim a little bit away from the ends there. The only reason I'm putting my hand over the end is just to catch those naughty little bits of wire so they don't ping off into infinity. If you don't have, like the bead just did, there we go. If you don't have those memory wire pliers, you can use your bail making pliers, or you can of course use your trusty round nose pliers. These are great for everything. If you're going to use the round nose pliers, to get a repeatable loop on the back of the design, it's advisable to either make a very clear mental note of whereabouts you're using, or just pop a little bit of marker pen onto one side of those pliers so you can see that size and you can repeat that over and over again. One of the reasons I really love these is that I can't possibly get the wrong size, you know what I mean? So let's put some loops onto these, and if everything goes horribly wrong and it's far too long, we can always start again. So what we're looking to look out for here, and I may just trim just a little bit more off looking at it more closely now, is we want the bead to sit, when it's hanging, above the largest or lowest bead. We don't want it clanking around on top of it. I mean, maybe you do, but it makes it slightly more 3D if you do that. What I'm looking for in this design is to have that just cascading up very, very gently so that it swings just a little bit above the largest and lowest bead. So I think probably I'm just going to trim a tiny little more away from the end of the wires on this one. I'll probably make it too short now, but that's endlessly the sort of thing that I do. So let's just cover that end of those wires again. Take the tiniest amount off the end and see how we go now with those memory wire pliers. So I'm just going to turn this towards me on the first side, rotate that all the way around, and just make sure that the end of the wire sits flush against the preceding section. I've got turned around just then. Turn the pliers all the way around and get that wire to sit nice and flat. If it does lift up for any reason, you can just give that a quick squish. We want it to stay in 2 dimensions. Let's have a look and see how that fits. I think that's just at the lowest possible distance it could go without it snagging too much on the bead below. Now, because I've got a glass crystal and a clay, that wouldn't actually be a massive problem, but I just prefer to see a little bit of light between the two. As I mentioned before, we're working with tiny lengths of wire here. These are all sorts of pieces that you can grab from your scrap pot, from cut-offs of other projects. Another thing that you can do, if it's just a tiny bit too long, rather than recut it, is we can turn that loop a little bit further over, like so. Doesn't look quite the same. I'll do that on the opposite direction, like so. But we then do need to make sure that they sit symmetrically. Although they hang on opposite sides of the head, it's really hard to see if there's a difference in them. I would prefer to send jewellery out that is perfectly symmetrical. So I'm just going to measure those up and make sure that they look the same. This one is slightly longer, so I'm just going to add a slight adjustment on the back here. So all I'm doing is rotating in exactly the same way I was to begin with, just to bring those to be the same drop size. So for the third and final piece, this section of wire is only about 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches in length. Again, it is 1mm or 18 gauge. I'm just going to put a little bit of heat and warmth into the centre, and I am as good as my word. These are scraps and offcuts of wire. So for this section, I'm going to use my 6-step bail making pliers to create the round form, and that's because I want it to be quite narrow. Another reason I'm using a very large hold bead for that central one. I'm going to make it a little bit shorter so that it sits up above the other beads, but it's going to be quite dramatic because it will swing around. It's got that large central hole. So I think I'm going to go for step number 3 on my bail makers. I'm just going to grip those 2 sections of wire and wrap them around in both directions. So let's take that away from the pliers, the 6-step bell makers, and I'm just going to even that up rather than mess around. Don't want to take up too much time. There we go. And I will ensure that all of this goes into the melt pot for later use. So that's really quite a narrow little U shape I've just created. If you were to use a bead such as this or such as this, you would probably struggle to get it to go around that lower section immediately before the centre, but with a very large hole spacer bead such as this one, they will sit on really easily and they look quite pretty. So let's try that inside the next size. I think by the time we've added the loop on the back, that will be absolutely perfect. So let's again grab those memory wire pliers, and I'm going to draw this up and over towards me. And you can make any movements that makes your life easier. So you can move the pliers or you can move the wire. It's absolutely up to you, whatever makes your hands happy. I know that everybody has different capabilities and different points that they struggle with, so you can make very tiny movements. What we're looking for is to have those two loops as closely symmetrical as possible. And I also like to keep them nice and straight. So once I'm happy that that's centralised, I'm just going to pinch the centre like so to bring those two upper loops together. I'll just do that on the other section as well. So we're making both parts of the earring together today. Quite often I'll just make one, and I wanted to show you today when I say make pieces of your work and then switch to the other one, this is exactly what I mean. Just do a little at a time, and then you'll always be able to make symmetrical or as close to symmetrical as matters, at least. So the first thing I do after I've made those loops is straighten them up so they're sitting straight behind the smooth wire in front, and then I'm going to just pinch those gently together. So we've got a series now of bits and bobs that we're going to use. So for the last part of today's video, we're just going to get everything to sit together neatly on an oversized jump ring. Now I'm going to be honest with you, I made these. They're not perfect. They are 9mm inner diameter or 11.5mm outer diameter. They're made from 1.25mm gauge wire. So that's as best as I can describe them. And I made them by wrapping the wire that I had to hand, which is 1.25 or 16 gauge wire, around the largest post on my bail makers, and then I carefully trimmed little sections away. Now it's not really how one ought to make jump rings, but for today's video that's how I did it, and I made sure that both cuts on either end were flush. And then I've just taken a second to realign them, make sure they're perfectly round so that they will close up ever so neatly. You could of course always buy them. Let's head back down to the board and we will check out how to put everything that we've made together all together. So we're now going to assemble our earrings. Let's just line them up and make sure that we're happy with how everything looks. Your loops on the back need to be nice and straight and hidden behind the front wire. These ones are going to sit funny because obviously they've got more size to them than the other ones have. I'm just going to show you one of these because the assembly process is exactly the same. So here's my hastily made emergency jump ring, and I'm just going to open that by hand to begin with, leaving myself quite a nice space between those cut ends. We're going to begin by adding on one side of the first and largest drop and just let that to hang down. We're going to grab one of the second ones, allow that to hang down. When we come to the third one, what we're looking to do is ensure that all of the loops are facing in the same direction, so the loops go to the back, and I'm going to put both of those on the jump ring at once, allow that to just hang, and then what we need to do is add the second loop on the middle segment and the loop on the largest drop. Now if anything doesn't really sit right, so these are a little bit too long, these middle ones, if I was going to make this to sell, I would probably remake those, make them just a little bit further up. If you need to do that, you can simply take everything off, and I'll show you that now because it's something that you may come across in your own version. So what I'm going to do is just put these back to back for a second, and then I'm going to trim the wire away equally. So let's cut those loops just over the top, here and here. I'm kind of going by eye, but you could measure them. you could indeed measure them. That's something I tend to not do a great deal of. And we'll just check in a second to make sure that these are symmetrical cuts again. There we go. And then we're going to grab back those memory wire pliers and return those loops. So let's just pop that in the same direction as it was going before. Hopefully it won't now be too short, but you do have the option to just go again. These are all bits of scrap wire. I'm as good as my word. They do come out of the scrap pot. So we're keeping the same size. If that doesn't work for you, just get that wire a little bit warm. You can just hold that to get it warm and just close up very, very gently. So let's do the same on the second one. And we're looking for these to replicate each other so that you get a symmetrical pair of earrings. One of the reasons I don't edit my videos is because if I make a mistake or something doesn't go completely to plan, I would rather show you how to fix the issue or talk through how you can improve the situation than just kind of hide and pretend these things never happen. So I'm just pinching that very, very gently to bring that slightly closer together. Get these side by side to see if they match up. Yep, they're the same size, so I'm just going to very carefully straighten that loop at the back. Pop that one up out of the way and we will start again. So I'm going to add in my largest section, pop the first loop in. Add in the second, now remembering that the loops go at the back, and then we're going to draw in the tiniest hanger, make sure that fits. It does still fit, happy days. We're going to add in the second half and then the last section just over the top and close that around. So you may wish to just modify the sizes as you go through. So I'm just going to very gently push that middle one until it sits how I'd like to see it. Now you should be opening and closing your jump rings with 2 pairs of pliers rather than by hand to preserve the shape of that ring. So let's just give that a little squish until it sits how we want it to. Again, these are hastily made emergency jump rings. So all I would do here is probably just very gently modify that middle shaped drop. It's gone a bit to the skew until that sits how I want it to. But again, you do have the option of just remaking that central one or any that don't fit. So now I've taken it too short and the top one doesn't fit. Again, I'm not particularly worried about it because I think you get the point. Let me show you one that I made earlier. So they cascade down in size order, and all I've done up at the top is add on a homemade earring finding. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the triple drop earrings tutorial today, including the power cut and my minor mess up. I'm going to finish off the pair of earrings we've made together, take a photograph of them and bung it on the end of the video. Have yourself a beautiful day and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.